Richard Haass, senior counsel at Centerview Partners, president emeritus of Council on Foreign Relations. It's great to see you.
Good to be back.
You see those images and you think what?
About Putin and Xi?
Yeah.
Look, this is an axis that's been growing in the last couple of years.
Evil axis.
They clearly oppose an American-led, dominated world. The Chinese have moved awfully close to the Russians in Ukraine, and the Chinese, while as best I can tell, Andrew, are not providing them arms. They're providing them with the capacity to make arms. And you know, I think what we live in a world now where all the hopes that you would have great power, coordination, and cooperation are dashed. And the real question, for the most part, is not what we can achieve in foreign policy, but what we can avoid. Because quite honestly, neither of these countries has emerged as a partner.
Okay, do we have any leverage?
Over Russia? Not a whole lot.
No, Russia we have no leverage, but do we have any?
Well, the leverage over Russia is our support for Ukraine. And
right.
Now that the spigot's been turned on, we'll see how that plays out over time. Over China, look, not a whole lot. I think, what the administration did the other day with the higher tariffs is one form of leverage. It's basically telling the Chinese you can't get away with a return to an export-led growth model. You can't subsidize your workers and your factories at the expense of ours. That gives us a little bit of leverage. We can strengthen Taiwan. We can work closely with Japan. Again, we're not going to bring about a China that's going to be a partner. The question is, can we push back against China so it doesn't do things that we don't want to see?
Richard, it seems like any other country, objective country other than Russia, would look at what happened in Ukraine and, at least see that in world order and just whatever you want to call it, that was horrific, what Russia orchestrated there. So is China so, I guess, its own self-interest align it with Russia, or is it just completely ignore all the what's happened in terms of the human casualties and the cost? Or does China not care because they do the same thing to the Uyghurs? Is that basically it? They're both. Is it an evil axis, I guess is what I'm saying.
It's a little bit too strong. I don't think that's a priority for them, what you're getting at. I think, look, the good news is China was sobered by the Russian experience in Ukraine. The fact that the West went to bat for Ukraine as strongly as it did. Xi Jinping must think a little bit about, Putin's army didn't perform so well. My own army's untested.
But no second thoughts about look at what they did to look at what they did to those cities and the number of. But I guess people say that about us backing Israel. So it's all in the eye of the beholder.
I think for the Chinese point of view, this is the cost of, if you will, of foreign policy. I don't think that gives them
no recriminations.
And look, think about it. What's the biggest priority for China? When Xi Jinping speaks about the rejuvenation, which is his favorite word, of the Chinese nation, it's no longer about high levels of economic growth, which it would have been 10 or 20 years ago. It's about Taiwan. It's a foreign policy goal, not an economic goal. It's not a goal about what's going to happen inside Chinese society. This is a somewhat different China.
But let me ask you this. This is Jamie Dimon, who was speaking with Wilford Frost yesterday. He says, we should be strategic, be very thoughtful, and fully engage with China. Fully engage with China. They are not an enemy, he says. They are competing, and they want to. But then he goes on to say they want a different world than we want. The free and democratic Western world. It is worth fighting for. So,
I'll let you parse Jamie's use of language there. But look, it's not the Cold War. China, unlike the Soviet Union, is fully integrated economically in the world. They're everywhere. We can't keep them out. But look, we've got to have 2020 vision. We can selectively economically cooperate. Big market still, but for strategic goods, we've got to be really wary about helping them. We've got to understand the threat they pose to our own workers and all that. And foreign policy, in most instances, we are not on the same page. Can we maybe find some ways limited to cooperate? I don't know, but they haven't used their influence with North Korea. North Korea continues to build up its missile force and its nuclear force. They haven't been a big help with Iran, as best I can tell, though the Chinese are Iran's biggest importer of oil. They haven't been, we just talked about, they haven't been helpful with Ukraine. It doesn't make them an enemy, but I think you've got to get up in the morning and say the United States and China are not aligned.
Where do you think the relationship is between Israel and the United States and the Biden administration in particular? Sarah Eisen had a good interview yesterday with President Netanyahu.
Arms embargo starting to crack.
Well, it never was an arms embargo.
No, but
it's just 99% of U.S. military aid, close to $4 billion a year, is going to Israel. So enough with the arms embargo talk. The United States has been and is extraordinarily supportive. The interesting story out of Israel, and I was just there a few days ago, the interesting story is what is going on inside the Israeli government. You've got the Israeli defense minister openly breaking with the Israeli prime minister.
Right.
And saying it makes no sense to just go after Hamas militarily. This idea that you can be sequential, let's try to, quote unquote, eliminate Hamas, which is an impossible task, and then we're going to think about what comes after. He said, no, we've got to think about what comes after now. We need an integrated policy. We need a political track in addition to a military track. This is a member of the inner war cabinet. For the first time, the pressures inside the Israeli government have surfaced.